Welcome to the garden at the barn, Surge Hill. We open this for the NGS just once a year with my sister's garden, Surge Hill House, which is just over the road. That's the house actually where I was born and brought up and learnt my sort of early gardening tricks, mainly from my mother. Sue and I moved here in 1987, and when we came here there really wasn't any gardens. There was no garden at all. There was 50 acres of wheat, and we owned about half an acre. And we started by growing beans and cabbages in a little courtyard, and we had a little strip around the barn where we planted a yew hedge, and we started planting a rose garden. Since then it's sort of grown and grown and grown. There was never any great grand plan, but after about 5 years we were able to buy a bit more land and started gradually expanding the garden one bed at a time. So when you see the garden today, which really feels, really quite grown up, it's actually the age of our 3 children, because we moved here and with one baby in arms, and then had 2 other children quite quickly. We planted all the trees at the same time, so all the big plants you see in the garden are about the same age as our children, and they've grown up as the garden has grown up around them, which has been a rather wonderful experience for us all. So when you look around the garden today, nothing that you see here was here when we first came here. The garden has now really developed into 2 separate parts. There's what we almost think of as the old garden, which is the bit that we planted from about 1995 onwards, and then that forms a little loop, as it were. And then there's another garden which is like a wild meadow. We call it the Prairie, and it's really quite an unconventional bit of garden in that it's all grown from seed, broadcast straight onto the ground. And this was a great experiment that I did about 7 or 8 years ago now with James Hitchmore from Sheffield University, with whom I've worked quite a bit. And I think part of the key to the understanding of the barn is the way that it's set in the meadow. The meadow seems to be the thing that joins everything together. It's really beautiful in spring with cowslips and narcissi, but it's the sort of constant thread, the bit that you return to the whole time. So without much more ado, shall we set off and have a look at the various bits of the garden? This first bit of the garden, in fact I'm taking you a slightly perverse route. It's not straight down the middle, it's off to one side. This is a part of the garden we call the rose garden, but in fact it's got no roses in it. It used to have a lot, and it's now an area that gets very, very tall in summer, and that takes us really to the main old part of the garden, which is the west garden. And this is really along the lane that divides us from the main house at Surge Hill. It's a wooden garden along the edge, with quite a lot of things like anemones, the mopsis. You can see geraniums, astrantias, lots of martin lilies, and then these magnificent tree peonies, which I grew from seed. Peony rockii, various forms of peony rockii. In the more open bit of the west garden, all the paths are grass. In the shadier parts there are things like epimediums and a beautiful plant there called Mayum atamanticum. And then in the sunnier parts we've got drifts of Camasias and springs and alliums, Eremurus, various sorts of Eremurus. Quite a lot of quite rampant plants, cow parsley. We tend to pull that out all after it flowers. Geraniums, Euphorbia palustris, quite a lot of magnolias, and then this, I'm about to use the word old yew hedge. It's not actually that old because we planted it in the early 90s, but we've pruned it in such a way as it looks pretty old. This is looking back towards the barn, which is in really the middle of the whole composition. And the centre of the garden is really formed by this circle of of hornbeam hedging. There goes my dog Rabbit, who will no doubt accompany us for much of our tour around the garden. It's like a little capsule where the axes of the garden interlock. So if we walk in here and then turn round to look out of the garden, we'll see one of the axes that divide the garden in half. So suddenly you get these quite green moments which alternate with the more colourful and involved parts of the garden. It's the setting in the meadow that in many ways sort of defines the whole position of the barn. So in early May we've got all the Narcissus poeticus and cow parsley, drifts of these thorn trees. This is Crataegus cruscalli, and there in the distance you can see the tumps of box which are planted along the edge of the barn. And the garden then drifts out into the nearby countryside. This is a little wood where my grandmother used to keep a bull, so we still call it the bull pen. We've naturalised lots of native flowers in it, primroses and cowslips and wild garlic and things like that. And quite recently we've made a pond here, which is a wonderful source for wildlife. Coming back to the barn, this is the other loop I was talking about. So this is the Prairies. So this is about an acre of seeded vegetation. Lots of exotic and interesting plants here: silphiums, bouquets, various monadas, dioramas. You can just see some Eremurus coming up here too. And the whole back of it is surrounded by a beech hedge which has just come into leaf. And then really the most recent part of the garden, which is really just developing at the moment, which is designed around a grove of Cornus Norman Haddon, a hybrid of Cornus cusa and Cornus capitata. And then finally we find our way back to the barn and the courtyard, which for many people who come to the garden is the first thing they see. And this is designed around a garden that I made for Chelsea in 2005 and then really brought back to the barn, and here it is. So I hope you've enjoyed this whistle-stop tour of the garden at the barn, Surge Hill. It's always much better if you can get one of my sister's magnificent teas at the end of it. So I hope one day you'll come and enjoy the whole experience, and I very much look forward to seeing you if you do come.